Hello, hello. Welcome to the stream. I decided to go live again today because it seemed like that was a very productive use of everyone's time. And yeah, between 2 and 5, I'm usually pretty wiped out from doing the first part of the day's work. So this is a nice way to refresh, to talk to all of you and check in with the community and see what your questions and comments and concerns are. Okay. I've got everything pulled up now. I'll trim this off once we get done. So, hello, those of you who find this later. I am Dr. Jared Jones, and my research specialty was ancient systems of meditation, in particular Buddhism, with a deep focus on Buddhist philosophy and the philosophy of science. And my master's work, I dived into the cognitive science of meditation. And yeah, I'm here on YouTube creating content as well as creating, going live every day to answer questions and to train people in meditation. So my passion is teaching lay people living in the real world how to meditate. So the stream yesterday was pretty exciting. We had quite a few people come through. That may be because it was a Sunday. I'm not sure, but I figured I'd give it a go again since it was a useful thing. It seemed to me it was a useful thing for everybody. So I figured I would go live again today from, 2:30ish to maybe 5:30ish, depending on how things are going. And once again, just answer your questions live. So for those of you who happen to come in the next minute or so, bear with me. I'm just going to put a note in the chat so people know what we're doing. But yes, if you're floating in now, just begin firing away. Whatever questions you have about Buddhism or meditation, I'm happy to answer. So it looks like we've got a couple people. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Looks like we've got a couple people in the room already. Please do. If there's anything on your mind, just pop it into the chat. Otherwise, I'll start rambling as I usually do, and that'll end up somewhere. Let me see. So, for those of you who are interested, I think where I'll start today, while I'm kind of half paying attention and trying to get the thing I should have pinned before I started up. Yep, here we go. Here we go. Okay. Open questions about Buddhism and Buddhist practice. All right, chips in a few bucks. Okay. Hopefully I'm still coming through. There we go. All right. Fair enough. As long as I'm still live and things haven't dropped, that should be good to go. So uh, I'll just start rambling as I usually do. And if you guys have questions, comments, concerns about Buddhism or Buddhist practice, just pop it into the chat and I'll answer it in order as we go. So right now, for those of you who are interested, and I know that we are online today in the Indian time zone. So I think it's just maybe 8 o'clock or something in India at the moment. And so I want to raise this topic because it's so important for Buddhism in India. Uh, there's a Christian minister named Ravi Zacharias, who is perhaps the most prolific polemicist against Buddhism on earth. And he was not, I will say this, he was not particularly unkind about it. But like some of the other ministers and so forth that I have covered, he gets a lot of things wrong. And so I'm going to be putting up a fairly lengthy video, probably in the next 3 days, where I'm looking at a lot of the critical arguments that he makes. And what's really interesting is that the mistakes that he makes are the mistakes that I have noticed in academics who haven't studied Buddhism at real depth, theologians who haven't studied it at real depth, and quite often also from managing Facebook groups for the better part of a decade, where I've seen 1 million or so members come and go in various Facebook groups pertaining to Buddhism. I've seen that these are common misunderstandings amongst Buddhists as well. So it has some value. It has some value, and the video that I put up recently responding to Dr. Tennant proved to me this is something that's really worth doing. So that's what's going to be coming up in the next few days. So if you have something relevant to Ravi Zacharias that you think is perhaps a bit harder to find, or something that people wouldn't be aware of normally, that might not be something that's in my sort of purview as I'm doing research on his arguments and positions, please do send it my way. You can put it in the chat here, or you could send it to me privately or put it in the comments. So what's really fascinating about his arguments, much like Dr. Tennant's, is that he gets most of Buddhism wrong in arguing against Buddhism and has to ignore huge amounts of Buddhist thought and practice and metaphysics and everything else in order to make his arguments work. He wrote a very famous book that's a dialogue between the Buddha and Jesus, entitled What is anatta? Okay, it's a good question. It's actually relevant to what I'm already on the topic of, so I'll get to that very soon. Called what is it? I'm forgetting the title now. I actually have it pulled up. Hold on. Something and the Lotus. The Lotus and the Cross. He wrote this book. It's very short. It's easy to read. And it's just a dialogue between Jesus and Buddha, who are riding on a boat together, discussing the misfortune of a young girl who's a prostitute, and the different way in which he imagines that these two great religious figures would have responded to this young girl in real life, in real time, and then of course how these two figures would have interacted on the boat. So in theory, like this could be, to be a fly on the wall of that conversation, if it was a real one, would be really fascinating. I have a wild hair to sort of rewrite the whole thing as if it's from a Buddhist perspective and try to be a little more fair with the discussion, but nonetheless, it was an interesting read, and I'll be pulling, I think, maybe 15, or no, it's actually more than that. I think it's like 22 quotes out of the book where he's making arguments that are just wrong about Buddhism, but wrong in a way that's interesting to correct, relevant to the times that we're in. And then also there's maybe 10 videos on YouTube that are quite short where he's making certain kinds of arguments against Buddhist thought and practice that, again, I think are worth responding to. So one of the things that he argues, to finally get to your point, how would you like me to pronounce your name? Agarasiv 3, the third. one of the arguments that he makes is that the Buddha's position was that you need to annihilate your sense of self, and that this is what liberation is de-selfing, or how else do Christian thinkers often say it? Sort of the purgation of self, the removal of a sense of self. And I think this is what many people hear when they hear no self or not self, or the emptiness of the self. They think, oh, there's no self at all. Self doesn't exist. And this is an extremely important point. And there was one gentleman floating through the comment section and the live stream yesterday who was saying, well, the Buddha was just responding to the Vedas and the Upanishads, who had a different view of what the self was, and he was rejecting that, and that's the whole story there. That is not at all the story. If you read the Vedic texts and you look for this term Atman, and you read the Upanishads that were available at the time of the Buddha and look for this term Atman, at least in my studies of those texts up to this time, and I could be wrong. If someone wants to prove me wrong on this, please do bring the quotations that show that I'm wrong. But what I have seen in my studies is that this term Atman is mostly used in a very ordinary sense, in the way that you and I might say, I went by myself to the grocery store, or she herself went to the park. It just means the self, like me, you, in a very normal way. So there's that aspect. Then, when you look at the more religious side of how the Atman is used, there's a couple of Upanishads that were potentially available at the time of the Buddha, early Upanishads. And those two Upanishads, when they use this term Atman, what they mean is, yeah, I'm back at it again. It just, cleric, it seemed like a lot of people were available from around 2:30 my time to 5:30 my time. So I figured, it's worth getting on and talking to people while they're here. Also, honestly, I've been up since 7 my time working on research and stuff, mostly for the next video that's coming up. So I've already been at it for what is that, 7 hours? 6 hours? And my eyes are so tired I can't see what I'm reading anymore. So I have to take a break. So why not take a break by hanging out with you guys and talking to you about whatever your questions are? It energizes me. So Atman, self. So self can have this meaning in Sanskrit and Pali. It can just mean me or the self in a very ordinary way. It can also mean, if you read the Upanishads and the Vedas, it can have this connotation of basically consciousness. Yeah. Do your reading. Do what you got to do. We're just hanging out here. Consciousness, and the fact that your consciousness is inseparable from the universal consciousness, right? And now when you look at the Buddhist conception and description of the Atman that they are rejecting, it does share some common features with that Upanishadic, let's say, Upanishadic definition of the self, but it's actually really, really different from it. The Buddha isn't saying, he's saying in other places that simply meditating on Brahmanatman, for example, doesn't fix your problem. But he's not saying that when I talk about no self, I'm talking about no Brahman, right? Because that would have been very easy to say if he wanted to say that, and he never did. And what he said is, actually, you have an innate cognitive error. You have an innate cognitive problem where you see the world as being made up of unchanging, unitary, and independent phenomenon. How do you know? Well, to make it more interesting, since I've been talking about a mountain for the last week, let's talk about a different object, okay? Think about a bedroom. Okay? What is it that makes it a bedroom in particular? Can someone in the chat tell me exactly what it is that makes a room into a bedroom? If you take the furniture out of there, what is it about the room itself that forces you or your mind to go, this is a bedroom. Furthermore, once it's been made into a bedroom through whatever that process is, what is it that continues, that causes it to continue staying a bedroom from moment to moment and not changing its identity? In other words, it becomes an unchanging identity from moment to moment, right? Furthermore, it's not two bedrooms, it's one bedroom. It's a unitary, singular thing, isn't it? When you look at it, you don't go, oh, there's two bedrooms. No, it's one bedroom, and it's unchanging over time. The stuff in the bedroom is changing, but the very fact that it is a bedroom is staying just as it is. And actually, when you analyze, that doesn't seem to be dependent upon causes and conditions in the ordinary sense. Let me give you an example for why this might be the case. When you're buying a house or looking at a flat, quite often there's no furniture in the flat or in the house. But you go into a certain room and they say, this is the bedroom. What do you mean? What is it that makes this one the bedroom? I mean, really, somebody tell me in the chat. What is it that makes that empty room a bedroom? And yet, even when the causes and conditions that we would associate with a bedroom, like a bed and side tables and lamps and or whatever you think a bedroom needs in it, right? Even when the causes and conditions for a bedroom, all the parts and things you think need to be there aren't there, still your mind will go bedroom and somehow identifies it as a bedroom. So this bedroom doesn't seem to rely upon causes and effects, doesn't seem to change over time, and doesn't seem to be multiple or dependent upon parts in some ultimate sense, when you're not thinking about it too hard, right? If you start thinking about it, you go, that's absurd. But if you're not thinking about it too hard, when you just look at stuff in your world, your mind goes, oh, that's an unchanging thing out there. It just is what it is. It stays what it is from moment to moment. It doesn't have anything to do with me. I just turned up here and my flat has 2 bedrooms. I just turned up here and this house has 4 bedrooms. I just turned up here and this place, whatever, right? That's how it seems to you. So that self, that one that appears in your perception as an innate part of your normal perception of stuff, that's the one that's mistaken. It's also true that attaining a state of Brahmanatman in meditation won't lead to the nirvana that the Buddha said is possible. But that's not what he's talking about when he's talking about the self. According to the Upanishadic understanding of the Atman, in my humble understanding, and again, maybe someone will correct me on this, but the Atman is actually already Brahman in the Hindu understanding, at least the modern Hindu understanding of the terms. The fact that you think you're an Atman in the Hindu tradition, in my understanding of how this works, is actually a complete illusion. Not even kind of an illusion, but you don't actually have an individualized Atman, and you will realize that when you touch down on the subtlest aspect of your being, which is already Brahman. So this Atman that the Upanishads are putting forward, if what I just said is true, can't possibly be the one that the Buddha is talking about, because the Buddha said you need to get rid of this wrong Atman you have, and the Hindus are saying we need to get rid of this wrong Atman we have. Right? So if the Vedas are rejecting this Atman and the Buddha is rejecting this Atman, he wouldn't be making a distinction. You understand? So again, somebody came through the comments in the last couple of days, and they were sort of grilling me on this point. But this is an extremely important point, and you won't understand selflessness unless you understand this point. So, yeah, is exactly. So I'm glad, and I think there are some Hindus that'll come through the stream and confirm this. That's right, that you're already Brahman, and you have this illusion that you're an Atman, and you're not. So the idea that the Buddha is rejecting an Atman that the Hindus also reject, and this makes him a reactionist against the Hindus of his time, which aren't even Hindus yet. They're Vedic practitioners and Upanishadic practitioners existing with hundreds of different views and texts and leaderships and all sorts of things that don't coalesce until the 2nd century, by the way. Anyways, So the idea that he's reacting against some monolithic Hindu authority or simply adopting what they say in accepting things like rebirth and karma is just not true. So now to go back to the Atman and how you actually get over this problem and what is anatman. So when we say anatman, what we're talking about is when you look at your own being, when you look at yourself, you see yourself like the bedroom. You see yourself as being a unitary thing that doesn't depend upon causes and conditions, in particular, doesn't depend upon your body and mind, or is somehow mixed with your body and mind, but also somehow not your body and mind. It's not entirely clear. When you look at your own psychology and meditation, it's not entirely clear because it's not a real thing. It's not there, right? So your mind sort of is trying to fit it in somewhere, but it's actually not there, so it doesn't fit in anywhere. So the type of Atman that's being rejected is actually just a mistake you're making in your perception. And you can prove it's a mistake because when you look for it, it's not there. And what is there is causes and parts. And that's what makes you up, is causes and parts. That's the self. That's the real you, is just the causes and parts that have come together. That all of that is what makes you up. There's a body, there's a mind, there's karmic stuff, and all of that together in a continuous causal stream is what you are. Ta-da, you have a self. What doesn't exist is the self you think is there, which is an unchanging, unitary, unitary meaning partless and singular, right? An independent, unitary, or partless, singular, unchanging self. That one is not there anywhere. Even though it appears in your perception as a type of cognitive error, in reality, it's not there at all. So the cognitive error, the mistake you're making in your perception, that self, if it was an object, right? And this is where people go nuts with this stuff because they go, well, no, read the sutta. It says there's no person. And you go, yeah, the person that you see existing there, when you see this actual physical object, the way you see it is as if it was unchanging, independent, permanent. Because you see it that way, that's what you're actually seeing. A lot of the suttas and sutras and things just say, yeah, it doesn't exist. Because the one you see doesn't exist. But if you analyze it, you'll find that there are causes and parts and subjects and objects, and that's what exists. And this is what drives philosophers in the West nuts, because you'll read, I was just reading a sutra today in preparation for something else. Let me see if I still have it pulled up, and I'll read it to you. And this just makes... I don't have it still pulled up. So there's a sutra from the Sanskrit canon called... Oh, no, that's not it. Well, I'll have to find it later. But in any case, it basically says there are those who see the self amongst my practitioners. There are those who see the self as a complete illusion, and hence it's dependent arising. And then you go, wait a minute. Illusions aren't dependent arisings in the way that you mean, because something that is dependently arisen can't also be non-existent. And so this makes philosophers who are trying to use the text as this absolutely crunchy, crystal clear, literal sort of way of reading the text will go, well, no, you're saying A is not A, and then you're saying A is A. Both of those can't be true. Your thesis fails, right? But in reality, what's being said is A is not what you see. Therefore, A is something else. So A is not B, but A is A, actually. There is a dependently existent self, a dependently arisen self, but there's no independently non-relational self, as I like to say. There's a relational self, but not a non-relational self. Okay, since we've got some people in the stream, let me say this. So I am, at this time, trying to go full-time and do this with you guys full-time. So if everybody drops 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 20 pounds, whatever you can in the link that I've pinned there, then, but if half of my followers do this, there'll be plenty of money for me to carry on with this. Also, I need to buy a new laptop because this one keeps, my streams keep blowing up because my computer sucks. It's super old. So whatever you can drop in the bucket there, a few bucks. Again, between all of us, if you all chip in a few bucks, then I can carry on doing this, and I can upgrade the system and carry on answering questions and teaching you all meditation. So please do chip in a few bucks. It means a lot. And also, I'm building a community of meditators. So I know some of you have heard this a million times already, but the school course down below, I'm setting it up basically so that a few people, maybe between 100 and 200 people, we're going to train pretty hardcore together. We're going to study pretty hardcore together. And once there's enough of us, maybe 100 to 200 people, then the community as a whole will one, be able to support me and doing all the teaching and so on and so forth. But two, the community would be able to support community members who have been there for a year or 2 years or 3 years, to be able to go into retreat for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month or whatever the case may be, because between 200 of us, to put someone in retreat for a month would cost, $5 or $10 or $20 each. It's nothing. And so we'd be able to sponsor each other doing really powerful practice. So please do, if you want to be a part of that community, join the school down below. And if you want to sponsor my teaching and videos and content creation and these live streams, just drop like $5 or $10 in the links I have down below so that I can carry on doing this. All right? Fair enough. Okay. So I hope that answers the question about Atman. I think the major disagreement is in the concept of Atman being unchanging and independent. Yes and no. Because, okay, somebody pointed this out in the comment section as well. Your Buddha nature is unchanging. The emptiness of your consciousness, which is what allows you to attain Buddhahood, is an unchanging thing, which means that since your consciousness and your Buddha nature are mutually interdependent, mutually dependent phenomenon, that there's an aspect of your underlying being that is unchanging. And actually, the qualities of that underlying fundamental aspect of your being, it is clear, it is knowing, it's cognizant, it's lucid, and it's empty of inherent existence. And those qualities are the same all the time. Uh-oh, aren't we talking about a permanent thing? No, we're talking about a changing thing that has the same properties in every moment. So the distinction is actually a really refined distinction between, of course, we would also say that the state of Brahman consciousness, we call this neither perception nor non-perception. We call it a formless jhana, is extremely subtle state of concentration that has no particular form. It's way beyond simply meditating on your consciousness alone. Incredibly blissful, incredibly peaceful. It's called the peak of samsara in Buddhism, because there's nothing better than this if you want to stay in samsara. But what the Buddhists say is actually also, and I think the Hindu Tantrikas agree with us on this, there are 4, maybe 3 subtler layers to consciousness that are sort of below that Brahman level of consciousness. And the subtlest one we call either Rigpa or we call it clear light. And, oh, did I hit 1,000 subs? Fantastic. Cool. So if we're talking about that subtlest consciousness, that very subtlest consciousness conjoined with emptiness is something that doesn't depend upon anything outside itself, according to some Buddhist thinkers. So now we have something that is sounding a bit independent, something that's sounding a bit unchanging, something that's, right? Like we're getting pretty close to things that sound like a Brahman. So this is why I say maybe at certain points in history, certain teachers, the disagreements were much wider. But actually, when you look at the details of these systems, you find that the distinctions you're making are quite refined. And it's difficult to say at certain levels of practice whether or not two systems are doing the same thing. And I tend to think if these great systems are doing different things, the way in which they're doing different things is quite subtle. And it's not at all at the level of the discussion that people are normally having about these issues. And I'll give you one example. So, one of my teachers from London, Geshe Tenzin Namdak, he's a classically trained Geshe, which means that he spent 20 years studying, I mean, literally 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, studying and debating Buddhist thought, Buddhist philosophy, and also non Buddhist thought and non Buddhist philosophy all the time, hours and hours and hours every day. And then, in addition to that, on his free time, very unusual for a Geshe in training, but he also did a lot of retreat. When he got done with his Geshe program, he was in India and he was talking to some properly trained Hindu practitioners, and he was just blown away that the stuff that they were talking about was not the stuff that he had been trained to think was the stuff that they were talking about in terms of what is the Atman and blah, 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 blah. And that's because these internal systems for Buddhism aren't actually talking about, in most cases, philosophical systems that are outside of Buddhism, which is really weird for scholars. They go, what is this? Is this just some weird polemical thing Buddhists are doing internally? No. It's and Oban, it's not just splitting hairs. This is really important. And I'll come to you, Word Walk. I will. I promise. I'll come to everybody that puts a comment in the chat. So what's really important is these philosophical systems are meant to help you understand the viewpoints you will fall into as a practitioner. That's what they're for. They're not for learning how to get really good at defeating other people in debate or beating all the other religions in philosophy. These positions are natural viewpoints you will fall into through training and through logical analysis of reality. That's what these things are there for. And you need to have an extremely sharp, logical, refined ability to look at the differences between things. By the way, the 5 aggregates? One of them is called discrimination. Another term for this is discernment. And you know why the Buddha included amongst the 5 aggregates? This is really important, you guys. Think about what he included there. He said you have a body, right? Form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness, right? Form is your body. Feeling and discrimination, those are just mental factors in your consciousness. And by the way, you have something like, the number is astronomically large if you include all of them, but you have at least 51 other mental factors, or, whatever the number is, 49 other mental factors. Why did the Buddha include 2 mental factors amongst a list of that could have been 49 mental factors? That's really weird. And then non-associated compositional factors, that's things like space and karma that don't fit into simply body or mind. But amongst this tiny list of things that make you up, he included feeling and discrimination. Why? Because for normal beings, ordinary beings, the primary way that they relate to their experience is through this mental factor of feeling. We find some things, this is not emotions, by the way, this is before you have an emotion. We find some sensations, like the sensation of seeing in a philosophical sense. In other words, we find some sensory things nice. We find some sensory things neutral. We find some sensory things unpleasant. That happens before we've had an idea about them or a reaction to them, or in terms of an emotional reaction to them, according to Buddhist psychology. So that's feeling, and that's what drives most beings who are in samsara, which is why it's there on the list of 5 things. The other one is discrimination, which is your faculty of being able to discern the differences between things. Why did he include that there? He included that there because this is the primary factor for people that are really making progress on the path. To make progress on the path, you need to be able to make refined distinctions between different types of things that exist. That's the thing that helps you get liberated from samsara. By the way, he could have put concentration on the list. That's a mental factor. Why isn't that on there? Because concentration doesn't take you out of samsara by itself. I mean, neither does discrimination. But you need this mental factor of discrimination that can really get down to the fine details of stuff and determine what exists, what doesn't exist, in order to liberate yourself from samsara. You develop concentration, and then you do this, right? So it's not just splitting hairs for no reason. You train in all of this stuff so that your mind is sharp enough so that you can see in meditative training, you can see the refined differences between things and be liberated through this process. Okay. Whew. I think I agree with you on the eternal unchanging thing. Both Vedanta and Buddhism share the insight of seeing through the illusion of narrative conventional self put into pure awareness. Okay, so this is also an important thing. If you'll bear with me, I know this is going to get a bit technical and for some of you maybe a bit boring, okay? But hang in there. I promise you it's worth it and extremely, extremely important to practice. In the West, in particular, and anywhere that Western education, Western psychology has touched down, we tend to think of the self, described by the Buddhist canon, in some contexts as being, as you said, your narratively constructed self. And that's not at all, not even slightly, what the Buddha is talking about. And you have to get this right, or you don't understand ignorance. You don't understand the problem you're trying to overcome. The story you tell about yourself inside, including I'm Jared, I have a degree, I've done this practice, I train with these people, blah, 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 blah. That story that the Vedantists try to overcome to get to Sat Chit Ananda, to get to pure awareness without the story on top, that story is not the self Buddhists are attacking when they say you need to overcome ignorance. You have to get this. You have to get this. So, yes, if you want to access the fundamental components that make up your being, like the 5 sense consciousnesses and your mental consciousness, you need to overcome the story to some degree. That's a methodological aspect of training. If you're stuck on the story of who you are and you can't get your mind to stop telling the story and just look at itself, you won't be able to see what's there when you're not telling the story. That's a method issue. You have to deal with that using methods. And the Vedantists have fantastic methods. Not this, not that is a fantastic method of self-inquiry to help you get at consciousness. But that is still not attacking the fundamental ignorance problem that the Buddha is talking about. Not even a little bit. Not even a little bit. It hasn't even, if it was a plane, it hasn't even touched the runway yet. Okay? So why do I say that? Because when the Buddha is talking about ignorance, he's talking about a very, very, very specific type of cognitive error. A cognitive error that even a meditator meditating in the state of Brahmanatman, according to the Buddhist canon, is still making. Think about this. A person who has transcended even a meditation on pure consciousness and entered into a state of awareness with no object, and then entered into a state of awareness that has a subject, but the subject isn't aware of itself. Yeah, at least this is my understanding of how you go through this process, right? So the state of mind is so incredibly refined and subtle, it's beyond really ordinary description. And this meditator is abiding in this incredibly subtle state of awareness and still has ignorance, according to the Buddha. You haven't fixed the problem. So this ignorance thing is not just some story you're telling about what job you do and who you are, what your childhood is, etc. Okay? So this ignorance thing is that you see yourself existing in a way that you don't exist. And that is still true even if you're doing extremely subtle types of concentration. In fact, if you read one of the texts I spent a lot of time on with my heart guru is a text on Kagyu Gelug Mahamudra that's written by the Panchen Lama, the first Panchen Lama, commenting on Tilopa's Ganges Mahamudra. So it's a Mahasiddha text from India commenting on how do you meditate on consciousness itself, or about how you meditate on consciousness itself, commented on by one of the great yogis of the early Tibetan tradition, and then later commented upon by, I think it's Alexander Berzin and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So it's just a fantastic text. In any case, one of the things it says there is that once you've entered into a state of meditation on consciousness, then, and this is where, in my understanding of Vedanta, you stop the work, right? You abide in that state of pure consciousness, which is the observer, according to them, or is the seer, is the knower. And in that state, if you remain there, you're liberated. Again, this is my layman's understanding of Vedanta. So, according to Buddhism, no. You've done something extremely rare and important, but there's still another step. And the next step is they say like a little fish. I love this analogy. Like a little fish in a lucid pond, let your awareness swim around within that meditation and investigate where is the meditator. And when you find that you cannot, when you discover that you cannot find the meditator or the meditating mind in that condition where you're meditating on consciousness itself, then rest on the absence of that meditator that you thought was there. And I say thinking in a sort of a hyperbolic sense, right? You're not thinking at that point, but the meditator that seemed to be there as the one who was doing the meditation, i.e., the observer that the Vedantists say is the real you, when you investigate like a little fish swimming around inside pure consciousness, and you can't find that observer, and you only find consciousness only, rest or abide on the absence of that knower or observer you thought was there. And when you do that, you're doing Mahamudra at the sutra level, right? So there's this additional step, wisdom, which removes the ignorance, which is the misperception that you have even when you're in deep states of concentration. So this is the big difference, I think, between these systems, in my humble view. And in some cases, it may be that that's not, that it may be that Vedantists are sort of investigating consciousness and they stumble upon this fact anyway. Fine. Then you're having a Buddhist insight. It's fine by me. And that's actually why I don't really care if people become Buddhist when they're training with me. You can do whatever you want. But if you do the training and you look at yourself, in my opinion, you're going to come to these conclusions because this is how it is. Not because you're being hypnotized or something, but because when you look at it, this is how it is. Okay. So I've been talking for another 15 minutes or so. For the new people, I do this full time. If everybody drops $5 or $10, the cost of a cup of coffee and maybe a bagel, whatever you can, in the links below, then I can carry on doing this for another month. I need to get to about 2,000, I think, for me to be able to pay everything, etc., for the month, and hopefully upgrade this piece of junk that I'm streaming from right now so that it doesn't crash every hour when I'm trying to talk to you guys. So whatever you can chip in makes a big difference, and then I can carry on doing this for all of you. So please do chip in if you have not already, or if you'd like to chip in again. Every bit is appreciated, and all together, all of us, if everyone's chipping in a little bit, then I think it's very doable, and you guys support me a little bit, and I support each of you a little bit, Okay. Okay. Next, Shashank Singh. Are you Sikh? Usually when I see the last name Singh, it's a Sikh. I had a lot of Sikhs that I went to school with, so I have a lot of respect for Sikhism. I'm reading the book Fullness and Emptiness by Swami Sarvapriyananda, which attempts to reconcile the two trains of thought. I'd be interested. I'd be interested to see. Maybe you can let me know the synopsis when you get done to see if these two things really are reconcilable or if they're not. I tend to think, in my humble view, that if you don't add the wisdom piece, the emptiness piece, that all of these concentrative states by themselves don't lead to the outcome that the Buddhists are aiming at. This is why I say the rest of it we probably share in common with every other tradition that has deep concentrations in their tradition, which includes a lot of mystical types of Abrahamic faith, by the way, and probably a lot of types of shamanism and a lot of other things. But what makes it unique is this element of using discernment, one of the five aggregates, to analyze who and what you are within that concentrated state, and to then meditate upon the nature of your being in the sense of the absence of inherent existence of your being, and to put it positively, the dependent arising of your being is something that you don't see in other traditions. Okay, that both are holistic in the same sense. Yeah, I'd be interested to get a little more detailed on that, Budai or Budhai. Ritual is kind of like that too. We have a phenomenological experience that we then shove into the framework of understanding. Yeah, it's a really interesting point. Um, when I was a much younger man and I was getting my degree and my bachelor's degree, and I was studying everything you can think of from Western mysticism, at an academic level, Western mysticism and Taoism and pretty Native American traditions, pretty much you name it. I was studying them as an academic, as a young man, while also learning from my gurus and training in Buddhism. One thing that occurred to me is that a lot of ritual stuff puts you in a condition where you generate a state of concentration. You just go and go and go and go until you kind of break through the ordinary mask of conceptual stuff, and that this is the doorway then to everything that the world calls mystical. And I wrote almost like a poem going, how incredible is concentration, that it acts as the doorway for every mystical experience of every religion everywhere on earth. I mean, it truly is this incredibly powerful thing. And there are so many different ways to generate concentration, which then leads to a huge diversity and range of different religious setups to try to generate concentration through different means. You can generate concentration through prayer. You can generate concentration through mantra. You can generate concentration through ritual. You can generate concentration through reading and reciting scripture. You can generate concentration while dancing. You can generate concentration hundreds of ways, which will then lead to experiences that extend beyond your ordinary sort of sense of what you think is real. And so you have this explosion of different types of religious practice that, in my view, basically lead to states of concentration. And those states of concentration lead to you getting a glimpse beyond sort of being stuck as a being that just exists through the five senses, right? So yeah, I mean, it's actually a pretty good point. And then yes, once you've had those experiences, you take whatever happened because of concentration and this whatever you saw or experienced, and that you then shove it through the tight box of your religious understanding. Let me give you an example. I had a lovely conversation about, I don't know, 10 years ago with a Christian mystic, a very lovely fellow. We went out and had coffee and we talked for a while, and then I moved away from South Carolina, and we didn't talk anymore. And he was a hardcore, full-on modern Christian mystic, had done a lot of retreat in that tradition, and I think was doing something like 4 hours or 6 hours of Christian mystic related practices a day. I mean, he was full on. And he described to me during one retreat, he said, I had been doing, I think he said he had been doing prayer, and he had been doing prayer for hours, like 8 hours or something. And then he went and he sat in the garden, and he said, my whole body filled with the Holy Spirit. And all of a sudden, all the colors in the garden were bright, and now the light was bright, and my senses were bright. And I could feel the Holy Spirit filling my body. And I went, wow, we call that samadhi. So in the Buddhist tradition, we have this idea that when you generate profound concentration, that it causes the winds inside the chi, the prana inside the body to move, and it creates bliss. And when this happens, your senses become really bright. It's almost like you go from 720p resolution up to 8K resolution with your senses. And so everything is bright and crystal clear, and your mind is calm, and you feel like everything's going to be fine, and you're filled with bliss, and your body feels great. And I went, yeah, we do that too. But for him, this was an experience of God. You understand? He thought God had descended and touched his heart, touched his being, and blessed him with this crystal clear appearance of the world and this feeling of well-being. So yeah, we take these experiences that come from concentration, in my humble view. And I'm not saying there aren't deities, and I just put a post up that some of you might find, where I'm saying, actually, there's no reason for Buddhists to reject something like Christian heaven. The Buddha talks about that sort of thing all the time. What we would reject is a permanent heaven. There are no permanent heavens in Buddhism, but there are heavens, and through devotion to certain deities and your good deeds and blah blah blah, you can be reborn in those heavens. I mean, this is something that the Buddha talked about and even told people how to do. He gave advice for how to do this if you want to do it. And in those heavens, there are devas that in some cases have a form, have a body, right? So you could have an embodied, spiritual, embodied Jesus figure, and you could have a formless, meditative concentration father figure that are interrelated by nature in a heavenly realm. You could even have that being, according to the Buddha, sometimes the devas and even in the Mahayana tradition, Buddhist deities and so forth can actually come down and touch you and bless you and help you with things and even cause winds to move in your body and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, there could even be a Holy Spirit, right? Like all of these things are accountable, can be accounted for in the Buddhist tradition without having to stretch too far. We would just say, well, if that deity thinks it's a creator God, it's just wrong. And if it thinks it's uncaused, it's just wrong. And if it thinks that heaven lasts forever, it's just wrong about that. And we know this, at least from a Buddhist standpoint, for several reasons, which I've covered before, but our meditators recall infinite past lives. Sometimes they are a universal God that exists as the first being who comes into existence during a new universe, and according to our canon, has the thought, I want other beings to exist, and then the karma of those beings causes them to exist in that deity's heaven. Is this sounding familiar? But that being thinks, oh, I just created all these beings. And so that deity then thinks, I'm the creator of everything. I'm the first. I'm eternal. It can't remember any past lives. All it remembers is being this deity. It says, I was here before everything else. I'm the most powerful. When I think things and I want things to happen, they just come into existence. I'm the most powerful thing there is. And the Buddha had to talk to this deity and say, can you remember what you were before this? I may be mixing a couple of stories here, but the Buddha talks to deities of this kind and says, can you remember what your previous life was? Because I can remember what it was. Before this, you were a deity called Radiant Light, and before that, you were another deity called, such and such loving kindness, so and so forth. And before that, you were this other thing. And the Buddha himself describes that after meditating for 7 years or 6 years on loving kindness, that he was reborn immediately after as a universal deity that was the first being to wake up basically as a Brahman type deity. So we can account for all of this. We just don't agree with the Christians on what their heaven is, right? We would say it's a temporary condition. Maybe you can be born there. Maybe there's a Jesus there. Maybe even you need to work with a Jesus figure of some kind, right? Let's say, to enter that heaven. Maybe that's part of the karmic conditions for that heaven. That could be true. Maybe you need to have a relationship with that being to go there. That might be so. But it's temporary. Unfortunately. Much better than being born as an animal, for example, but it's a temporary situation. So we don't want to do that. I want to be reborn in a pure realm or a pure abode, or I want to attain realization in this life, or I want to be reborn as a human again so that I can carry on with my practices and make more progress if I'm reborn in a really nice heavenly realm with angelic music and like interdependent communion with an incredibly powerful, blissful, loving, good being. When you listen to near-death experiences where people talk about experiencing formless deities and what we would call devas, it's heartbreakingly beautiful. How incredible! They want to do nothing else but remain with these beings and in their presence, and at once sort of unified with them, but also still having enough individuality to know that they're not that being entirely. And just the bliss of being in that condition. It's unbelievable. And according to Buddhists, this is why you don't want to go to heaven. Because if you do that, you're going to stop training, burn up your good karma, and then you fall right back down to the mess. So Buddhists consider these kinds of insights to be the sort of limited insights that people with some concentration get into how other things are working, how the larger world of rebirth realms and other things are working. So Jesus goes into the desert for 40 days. Maybe previously he was a deva in the heavenly realm of a particular deity. He recalls this. He recalls that he can't be separated from that deity. And through this sort of limited window of seeing how these things are, filtered through his Jewish upbringing and so forth, he thinks, I must be the Messiah. I mean, he could have been a very, very powerful individual, but anyways, I digress. I digress. Okay, let me get back to the chat because I've been droning on for a while. For those of you who are floating through, once again, it's my 15-minute checkup again. If everybody just drops $5 or $10 or so in the links below, I can carry on doing this with you guys every day, teaching people about meditation and answering questions live and making videos that help you guys understand Buddhism and train in meditation as real people in the real world. So please do just drop a few bucks in there if you haven't. If half of my followers dropped $5 in there, I'd have all the money I need to maintain this whole operation and carry on for another month. So please do that if you can. Okay, let's see. I'm now on Cleric's question. Is that negative, positive, neutral idea like Vedana? I also thought it was thought that applied aversion and clinging. Yeah, it is. It's thought that applies aversion and clinging. Because I've spent a lot of time marinating in the Tibetan tradition, I don't always have the Pali or Sanskrit terms at hand in my mind. Yes, that's right, Vedana. Vedana, actually. So that phenomenon is when your sensory organ comes into contact with something, it will find it to be either pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant. And then on that basis, it then clings onto or exaggerates the benefits of the pleasant one, doesn't really care about the neutral one, and develops aversion or it exaggerates the negative qualities of the bad one, the one that you don't like, or not the one that you don't like yet, but the one that is unpleasant when it's experienced. So according to karmic theory, the way in which you naturally see some things as pleasant, neutral, and unpleasant before you have wanted them or rejected them yet, right? That comes from your previous karma. And there's actually some there's some of that effect you can actually see in this lifetime as a psychological effect. So, for example, I love using this example because it's good fun. How many of you, I'll watch the live part of the chat, how many of you have an ex-girlfriend, an ex-boyfriend, an ex of some kind, where it was not a good breakup, where it was a bad breakup? Just put a thumbs up in the chat or something so that I don't have to look through the, you know? So here's the thing. Quite often, if you've had a bad breakup, if you see someone on the street, for example, that has the same hairstyle as that person, you go, oh, or if somebody has like one similar belief that was a core belief of that person, like I knew a guy who was dating someone for a long time and it ended badly, and that girl was really into crystals and stuff, and he started asking every girl that he went on a date with after that whether or not she believed in crystals, and if she did, he just turned right around and left. So our past experience begins to color the way in which we find something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral before we've actually rejected it or chased after it. So this is part of the functioning of karma. Actually, we could just say action. Based upon previous actions, you begin to condition the way that your perception experiences future events. And we know this from modern psychology. The Buddha just says that effect carries on between lifetimes also. It doesn't just happen in this lifetime. And the ones that you have when you come into this lifetime came from the past. They came from previous lives. They didn't come from your genetics or something. Okay. We think of the self as a set of properties. Word walk. A set of propositions. So that self that you see as a set of propositions is not the one that we're trying to overcome when we talk about ignorance. This is perhaps the most profound and interesting development, I would say, in it's either middle or late Indian Buddhist period or the sort of early period of Tibetan Buddhism, one of the two. They did this brilliant thing where they sorted out that if you really want to overcome ignorance very quickly, very easily, the first thing you need to do is identify in your experience the precise type of cognitive error that you're making in regards to other things. And they call this the object of negation. So, for example, everybody pick some object in your environment, unless you're sort of just busy and making lunch and I'm just in the background. If you're not too busy to do this, just pick an object that's nearby. Okay. Pick an object that's nearby and look at it, and don't try to figure out how it exists. Just look at it. That one that you're seeing, that's the object of negation. How do you know? Because if you start asking critical questions about it, your mind is going to get uncomfortable with the fact that you can't find it existing the way that it appears to exist. For you, unless you've done a lot of thinking or study and so forth already, it looks like that thing exists out there with its own properties, its own boundary, its own identity, and that all has nothing to do with you. To go back to let's use the river as an example. I really love rivers as an example for this. Of course, in Greece, they said you can't step in the same river twice, right? But think about a river. Okay, think about a river. It looks like the Mississippi River has been there for hundreds and hundreds and thousands and thousands and thousands, maybe millions of years. I can't remember how long. A long time, right? Therefore, this river has absolutely nothing to do with you and me, right? And maybe we can say, well, yeah, you and I came up with the name Mississippi River or the Ganges River, something like this, whatever river. Yeah, we came up with the name, but this entity, this thing, has been there carrying on, doing its own thing for millennia. It has nothing to do with you and me. We just happen to be here to see it. Right? Wrong. How do I know? Let me ask you this. For a river to flow over the land, unless it's flowing over solid rock, the groundwater has to be high enough. If this is the riverbed, right? So the riverbed's like this. If that's the riverbed, the groundwater has to under the ground has to come up like this so that you can see liquid water in the riverbed at the surface of the earth. If the groundwater goes down like this, then the river goes away, unless there's just a huge amount of water coming down from the mountains or something, and it's flowing over a pretty impervious surface. So where does the groundwater stop and the river begin? Where does that transition take place exactly? You say that there's a river out there. It's been there millions of years, has nothing to do with you and I. Surely there's a place in the world where the river stops existing, right? Surely the river has a boundary to it. It's not an infinitely, you know, it's not some infinitely pervasive thing. It has to stop somewhere. So where does the river stop and the groundwater begin? Somebody tell me this. Not most, sorry, but a significant amount of the what you think is water isn't water. There's a really fascinating study they've done again and again on water. And water actually, when it's interacting with itself, breaks down into two ions that aren't water. Or no, not ions. What is the word? I can't remember the word, but the the one of the oxygens will break off of an H2O, right? One of the oxygens will break off, bind with another water molecule, and so some of the water that you say is water is actually H1O and some of it is H3O. So which part is the river water exactly and which part is not? And then what about all the stuff dissolved in it? Is the salt in the river dissolved from the rocks coming down the mountain? Is that the river too? Or is that stuff in the river? What about the rocks below the river and the ground below the river that's maintaining it and holding it up? Is that the river? Well, if you took it away, the river would go away, wouldn't it? So you can't have the river without the stuff underneath it, but where is this river that is so obvious to your perception? Yeah, yeah, mind stream is good. I like that you see what I've done there. So you don't know where this river begins. Up in the mountains somewhere, it is snow melting, right? Or there's rain and tributaries that are running down and adding to this thing. Where does the tributary stop and the river begin? Where exactly does that happen? Where does the rain runoff and the river begin? Where does the snow melt and the river begin? And then the river flows into a lake or an ocean somewhere. Where exactly in the process of flowing into that other body of water does it stop being the river and start being the other thing? Because the lake is there, ostensibly, because that river and maybe a few others ran into that place and filled up that location. So is the lake just the river come to a standstill? The more you investigate this thing that is so obvious to you, the more it recedes and goes away and becomes more vague and more you go, well, I don't know. It's there. If I get in it, I'm going to get wet, right? Yeah. But you say it exists in an obvious way. Where is it? Now, if it existed the way that it appears, in other words, you don't think about it very hard, you look and you go, that's a river, right? It's totally obvious to your vision. Sometimes you can smell the river, you can hear the river. So whatever this thing is that allows you to identify what it is, it's there in the sound of it, it's there in the smell of it, it's there in the colors and shapes of it. So whatever this thing that makes it what it is like really pervasive. When you jump in the river, you can feel it, and you know it's the river when you're in it. So its identity somehow pervades tactile sensations. So this thing making it what it is like really obvious, extremely obvious. And yet, if you ask one simple question about it, all of a sudden it starts to recede and become more vague, more difficult to find, more uncertain. Where does the river stop? Where does the river start? No clue. But it exists, doesn't it? Well, yeah. But how? How does it exist? Okay. Now we're getting to it, right? What exists out there objectively in and of itself is not a river. This is why when you look for it everywhere, you can't find it. And there's no particular set of properties that makes it a river. Simply being water isn't what makes it a river. Simply running over certain rocks doesn't make it a river, because if you change the rocks of the Mississippi that are holding it there, it's still the Mississippi. It's just running over different stuff. And as a matter of fact, over millions of years or whatever it's been, it's run over all sorts of stuff and changed directions. And if you look at rivers, like satellite images of rivers over 50 years or 70 years or whatever, you can see they go like this. They move on the landscape. So a lot of them aren't even staying in the same place. So it's not the same water. It's not the same rocks. It's not the same stuff dissolved in it. It's not all water to begin with. It's not really clear where it begins and ends. So what's out there objectively is not the river by itself. That, the one that when you just look at it and go, river, that one, that's the mistaken perception. And you can prove it by just asking a few quick questions about, how does this thing exist? And you can show yourself it doesn't exist the way it appears. And then Buddhism, of course, has ways of reestablishing the existence of that thing. What's there is something that depends upon the parts. Exactly what parts? Difficult question, but it's depending upon its parts. If you take away the water, the river will go out of existence. If you take away the riverbed, the river will go out of existence, right? We know this much. If you take away the cause of the river or causes, it'll go out of existence. So if we stop all the snow melt and all the rain stops and the groundwater dries up, the river will go out of existence, right? So we know that it depends upon causes somehow. So it depends upon parts, it depends upon causes. Now we have the first two elements of dependent arising. But we don't quite have a river yet because we just analyzed it. And even with all the parts and causes in place, we still can't find the river. And that's a problem. So how do we get the river back? Here's what the great Indian saint Nagarjuna had to say. He said, the final piece of dependent origination is called dependent designation, dependent imputation. And this term, designation or imputation in Sanskrit, doesn't just refer to concepts. It refers to, again, it's a bit difficult to describe, but it's something to do with the process of discrimination, of determining what something is and what something is not. So it can be conceptual or it can be non-conceptual. Buddhas do it non-conceptually, for example. We do it mostly conceptually and with language. When you look at the river, what you see is not a river. We just established this. You're not seeing a river. You're seeing colors and shapes, and it's not quite clear where the thing you're looking at begins and ends, blah, blah, blah. So you're not seeing a river. So what is it that you look at, or what is it that you see when you see that river that allows you to identify what it is? What allows you to identify what it is not the presence of a particular property. And this was the whole, I mean, at least half of my PhD work was on this issue, because this is the hardest issue in middle way thought. What you see is not the presence of some quality. What you see is the absence of something that would stop you from designating it in a particular way. So what you identify in the components and causes is the absence of anything that would stop that object from functioning as a river. And this, again, this is a huge mouthful and probably way too much for a Monday afternoon, but think about this carefully. There's nothing there that stops it from functioning and being known as a river, is there? Because there's water and there's rocks and we don't quite know where it begins and ends, but there's nothing there stopping it from functioning as a river and from being known as a river. It can do what we expect a river to do. And when we look at it and we identify it as a river and we interact with it as a river, it does what rivers do and it functions as rivers should function. So a river, also critically, is not just the concept of a river, because if I was debating an aspiring theologian in the comment section today, and he had a point that was kind of similar to this. Simply having the idea of a river is not a river. That's the idea of a river. Simply having the word river in your head is not a river. Simply having the word and the meaning of the word in your mind connected together is not a river. So, in the same way, also, the boundaries of what a river is conceptually are fuzzy, right? Which is part of the reason you have trouble finding where the river begins and ends, because the concept is also fuzzy. So, reality is fuzzy and the concept is fuzzy. Reality is ontologically vague, your concept is semantically vague, and yet when they come together, they aren't vague. And this is what's so remarkable. I feel like I've lost probably all of you. When these two come together, a subject who is validly imputing the concept of a river, and an object that can be known as and function as a river because there's nothing within it obstructing it from being known and functioning as such. When those two come together, that relationship is a river. So a river is a relationship between subjects and objects. A river is not just the subjective stuff in your head, and a river is not just the objective stuff out there. So according to the middle way, and this is different from the mind only school because they would have a different ontology underlying the stuff that's out there on the object side than the Madhyamakas. But they would share this insight that you can't actually pull apart the subjective aspect and the objective aspect and still have a river. If you take the subjective aspect away, there's no boundary out there making that water not the groundwater and instead a river. There's no boundary out there making it not runoff and actually a river out there in reality. There's no boundary out there making it not the ocean that it ran into and actually a river still. So this thing that you think is out there with its own boundaries and edges and qualities making it what it is has no boundaries, edges, and qualities making it what it is from its own side. So the object itself is not a river in and of itself. So if you take away the object side, which is simply not obstructed from being known and functioning as the thing, or if you take away a valid imputation by a conscious being that labels it and interacts with it as such, you lose the river. The river is a relationship between subject and object. This is what I call relationally existent. In classical Buddhist texts, this would be called dependent origination. More specifically, within dependent origination, it would be called dependent designation. And this is a term that Nagarjuna coined to describe interdependence at the highest level of interdependence. Why do we consider this to be the highest level? Because a cause can't cause anything and an effect can't be an effect unless this happens first. And a part can't be a part of anything and a whole can't have any parts unless this happens first. So dependent designation must be a component of the two still very important sorry, what am I saying? Dependent designation must be going on in order for the other two types of dependent origination to make any sense. The other two types can't function, can't do anything unless dependent designation is taken into account. And that's a much more difficult point. Let's carry on. So that was about 20 minutes. Again, we've got some new people here. I'll say this again. I'm trying to do this full time, answer your questions, help you understand Buddhism, help you guys train in meditation as real people living in the real world. For my hardcore groupies who want to train in meditation as lay people and support the whole community in that effort, join the school course down below. I'm building a community. Eventually, we'll have enough people that we can support each other going into retreat long term for a fairly reasonable sum. And also, if you're just passing through and you don't want to go that way, you just want to hang out and you find this useful, helpful, just drop $5-10 in the links that I have posted in the chat. If everybody just drops $5-10 in there, then I'll have all the money I need to carry on doing this and helping you guys for the next month, and to upgrade my crappy laptop so that it'll stop dropping my streams. All right. let's take a look here. So next is, thanks for explaining. So I became famous by using logic like Charvaka, then started making supernatural claims like karma and rebirth. I would say no. The Buddha's enlightenment experience had three aspects. If you read the suttas pertaining to the Buddha's enlightenment, it has three aspects. The first thing that he said he experienced during his enlightenment was recalling infinite past rebirths and infinite numbers of cosmic expansions and cosmic contractions. In other words, he saw infinite universes come into existence and go out of existence, and infinite rebirths he had taken within those universes over the course of infinite time. That was his first insight when he starts describing his enlightenment. The second insight that he had was that when he stretched his mind out and looked at what other sentient beings were doing within this infinite cycle of them moving up and down, he saw that when over here in this lifetime they did certain types of actions, that later over here in another lifetime they experienced certain kinds of results that corresponded to those actions they had done in the past. And they corresponded to them in very specific kinds of relationships that he describes in summary as 10 positive actions and 10 negative actions. In other words, if you'd like to have nice stuff, there's 10 things you can do to have a lot of really nice stuff in your rebirths. And if you want to have really bad stuff, there's 10 things you can do to have a lot of really bad stuff. That's how he summarized it. 10 positive, 10 negative. Nice round numbers, nice and easy. But he didn't claim that this was from the Vedas or something. He claimed this, or that this was not even supernatural. Your mind is non-physical. Your mind is a natural thing. So none of this is supernatural. These are natural things that if you train your mind, which is non-physical, that your mind can learn about itself, right? And as I showed with Yogis of Tibet, and will show with some other documentaries and other things that are on the web, there are still yogis in the modern period who put in 10 or 20 or 30 years of practice and still have these experiences today. And through some unbelievably fortunate, wonderful stroke of luck, a few of them have been caught on camera talking about it. So this isn't just some weird thing the Buddha did that was like a marketing ploy or something. I mean, there are people who could care less and lived in the mountains for 30 years with, would have been happy to die in the mountains, not talking to anyone ever again, doing their practices or whatever. But people went out and interviewed them, and they say, yeah, I recalled all my past lives, and then this happened, and that happened, and it was like the Buddha said. Okay. The third insight, by the way, was then the uprooting of ignorance and the freedom of liberation from samsara. The postmodern movement. Yeah, so think about the analysis of the river. The postmodernists would stop having deconstructed the river and say, well, there's no river out there, so there are no rivers. We've deconstructed everything in the modern world down to that point because you can do this analysis of anything. Everything in reality can be broken down in the way we just described. But that doesn't mean it's just in your head. If you apply the concept of a river to your pet dog, it won't grow fish inside of it or something. You understand what I'm saying? You're just nuts. You're not clever. You haven't done something profound. You've gone crazy. So the imputation that's being applied to whatever is occurring externally, which is a non-obstructive basis, is what I call it. There's a non-obstructive sort of entity externally. That non-obstructive entity has to have a valid concept imputed upon it, and those two come together. When they come together, you have a real thing. You have a real thing, not an unreal thing. This is why it's dependently originated. It's real because it's dependently originated. Your misperception of it, that object that is the misperception, that one doesn't exist because it's not a dependent origination. You see? Okay. Did you see my vid on the caste system? I started watching it. I haven't watched it all the way through. I put it on my list. So I have a list now that I think is about 14 pages long of the responses and other things I need to watch and things I need to make responses to. So for those of you who have given me stuff to consider, I have it on the list. Trust me, I will get to it eventually. I'm not going to leave anyone hanging in the wind. Or if I do, I will tell you I'm leaving you hanging in the wind. Okay. Dharma is Dharma, only the truth matters. Oban. Yeah, I agree. If you're a Eastern Orthodox practitioner and you generate concentration by doing their set of prayers and practices, and then somebody takes you down the analytic process that leads to Buddhist wisdom, and then you have that insight through combining meditative analysis with the concentration you gain through your Eastern Orthodox practice, that's a Buddhist insight. That is the Dharma. And it doesn't matter what you call yourself from there forward, that is the Dharma, in my opinion. This is why I don't care if people become Buddhists when they train with me. I mean, yeah, it'll make some things easier because I'm Buddhist and I know how to frame things in that context much better than framing them in a Christian context or something. But if you want to train with me and you train in the methods that I'm teaching, they will produce the results that I'm talking about. It doesn't matter what tradition you're in. What do I think of Madhyamaka philosophy? I think I just addressed that. As one of my old friends once said, you know, I'm a Prasangika gunslinger, you know. I'm a middle way cowboy. Uh, Truthfully, honestly, not simply because I like it or something, because if I had found something that works better, I would adopt that position instead. I have found no philosophy, Eastern, Western, Tibetan, Indian, Native American, African, European, you name it. I've found no philosophy that works better than Madhyamaka philosophy, and I've found no philosophy that works better and more consistently than the consequentialist interpretation of middle way philosophy put forward by Shantideva, Chandrakirti, Buddhapalita, and half a dozen others, you know, and obviously including a bunch of Tibetans. Okay, got some people flowing through the stream. Once again, I'll say if you're here, if you drop $5 or $10 down below, I can carry on doing this with everybody every day or quite often and training everyone in meditation. It only takes $5-10 from everybody that flows through for me to be able to do this for a whole nother month and upgrade the laptop so that the stream doesn't suck and and all this. So do follow the links I put in the chat and just drop a few bucks in there, and then I can carry on doing this with all of you, which is quite honestly the only thing I want to do. There's nothing else in life I want to do besides talk about this stuff, help people with this stuff, train people in meditation, and do retreats and do my own study. So if that's something you want to do with me and you want to hang out with me, just $5, $10 once a month, drop it in the bucket, and we can all carry on doing this together, you know, as a community. All right. What do you think about Vedantins that think reflective awareness on some Tibetan schools like the Nyingma with the Atman of the Advaita Vedanta? I think there's a false equivalence fallacy there. Yeah. Okay. So when you start talking about certain branches of tantric Buddhist thought in which you begin describing the most subtle form of awareness as self-existent, there's actually some debate about how and why that language is being used. So, for example, depending on which Nyingma, and again, I'm not an expert on Nyingma, but this is just my take on it for what I am aware of the situation. Yes, I do. I'm a Buddhist, and I've been Buddhist for about 20 years. So, from the first person perspective of a person who has generated clear light mind, which is the subtlest type of mind that exists at all. This is the subtlest type of awareness that you have. And that's the one that carries you from lifetime to lifetime, by the way. You can generate the experience of that awareness through tantric techniques, through generating that awareness, when you behold it, when you experience it, when you exist as that because you have caused everything else to temporarily stop getting in the way, it looks self existent. And so from a certain, like, if you're kind of in a way, like if you're looking at it from over here and you're saying, okay, as a practitioner, when you experience this, this is how it's going to look. We know it's not like that, but when you look at it from over here, from the standpoint of being in the experience, it is emptiness and it is clarity and awareness from over here. Now, from over here, when we analyze it a bit, we know it's not self existent. And then some of them will go further and actually give techniques for within that meditation to do certain types of analysis that show you that it's not self existent within the state. Because within the state, if you're simply resting in the nature of clear light mind, but you haven't conjoined that with the understanding of emptiness or the perception of emptiness in that condition, then it doesn't liberate you. Why? Well, every time you die, you see clear light mind. Every time you go to sleep in dreamless sleep, you get pretty close to something that's very, very similar to clear light mind in dreamless sleep. And you're not a Buddha, right? You've died a million, billion, trillion, infinite number of times, and you're not a Buddha. So just seeing it and being in it for a little while doesn't fix ignorance. So you need to conjoin it with emptiness. So I think the difference is, once again, between the Hindu Tantra schools that probably do generate this state and some of the Taoist schools who probably do generate this state, and maybe even the Advaita Vedantists who access this through some means, perhaps, although I don't know that they're all accessing this, that what they do is rest in the nature of that consciousness without actually arriving at the emptiness of inherent existence of that consciousness. So this is my opinion on what the difference is. And if they did do that, if they did, as a Vedantist or a Kashmiri Shivist or whatever, then move on to to arrive at the emptiness of that most fundamental mind, that's a Buddhist insight. It doesn't matter if you call yourself a follower of Shiva or an Orthodox Eastern Orthodox Christian, or call yourself whatever you want. If you arrive at that mind and see the emptiness of that mind, you've had a Buddhist insight, an extremely important one. Okay. I'm now on R. Budhai. I think you may be interested in the work by Shamil Chandaria. He's a neuroscientist that describes these states as attractor basins that different traditions converge on. Okay. I often find, with respect, because it might not be like that, but I often find that those kinds of works don't add a whole lot to my understanding of these subjects, because it's someone trying to fit this stuff into a box that I don't think it fits in fundamentally. It is interesting to hear the neuroscience of these states when they have been studied. I think that data is interesting and helpful, but just here, there's been so many attempts in the academy to take all of this stuff and just make it into just normal psychology and make it all go away and turn it into mysticism and whatever. And it's just not like that. And if you train in it hardcore, you know that it's not like that, and you know that's not what it is. So just watching one more person try to do that is not very interesting. Give us a field view. Give us some field view or a comparative view on Vaishvedanta and emptiness reification in Tibet. Does noetic quality require a mystic experience? I would want to know what you mean by noetic. In terms of comparative Advaita Vedanta and emptiness reification in Tibet, I'm not sure. I think in terms of the Buddhist schools in Tibet, I don't really think that any of them reified emptiness in the relevant way. The position that I've settled on, based upon mostly the authority of great yogis actually, and not a logical reason, admittedly, is that clear light mind, because of its nature, clear light mind, because it already has no defilements in it, is so powerful that whatever type of selflessness you bring to it, in particular, if you bring Chittamatra emptiness, or you bring middle way emptiness to that mind itself is so subtle and so powerful, it transforms it into the correct understanding. And therefore, the debates that you have at the level of sort of the refined details of these schools at the level of practice don't mean as much. It is important to have those debates for other reasons I described earlier in the stream, but um, by the time you get to actually generating these experiences, either one of the most profound views on this subject will work. And, I think I've covered the Advaita Vedanta issue enough at this stage of the game. We're just framed to make sense regarding experience. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. Again, the shamanic traditions, the magical traditions are interesting because I think that, again, this is the academic in me speaking, just an opinion, but I think some of it is not real, right? Some of it comes down to the fact that your mind is a reality generating machine, and if you generate states of concentration, you're messing with the projector machine, and you can make a lot of weird stuff seem to happen that doesn't happen. That's one aspect. Another aspect is that we, according to the systems that I train in and a personal experience and some very weird personal experiences that I would never share with other academics, uh, I really do think that there are sub-physical substances like prana, kundalini, chi, etc. And it's actually not that hard to gain experiences of those. And one would be tempted to say that they're just psychological were it not for the fact that they cause real and dramatic physical effects and really profound psychological effects when you cultivate them, refine them, thicken and enrich them and cause them to move around the body in various ways. And I've had some of my teachers do things with those substances, let's call them, that defy the laws of physics. So for me, that convinced me that, the shamanistic and ritualistic traditions that are dealing with those types of substances in some way may be producing real effects through the use of those substances. And it's not actually magic, it's actually just part of how nature works. It's part of the stuff that makes up living beings, and uh, so some effects can be produced through the manipulation of these substances. Exactly what effects I couldn't say. It's not really my thing. I mainly use them for the sake of health and for the sake of certain practices that I do. Yeah, and in terms of the rest of it, ritual can be very, very, very helpful for generating states of concentration. And generating states of concentration can be really helpful for doing all sorts of other things, as I've been going on and on about throughout the stream. I don't see a follow-up on the word noetic, so I'll have to bypass that one. K4 is 3R. I need to know what you mean by noetic. Word. Weird or word? Okay. The Buddha says everything is just a river of changing thoughts, sensations, data packets, but the logic demands a question. If everything is changing, what is the constant background that notices the change? So, in every moment of your experience, there is a moment of consciousness, a moment of awareness that always has an undifferentiating set of qualities at the fundamental level. Those fundamental undifferentiated qualities are clarity and awareness, or clarity and knowingness. Clarity refers to two things. One, it's non-physical, and two, it gives rise to experiences. As an example, if you visualize a strawberry, your mind gave rise to the strawberry, and then it's also knowing, right? It's experiencing or is aware of the strawberry that you visualized. So mental things give rise to experiences and know the experiences, and they are non-physical, right? So these are the fundamental properties of awarenesses or consciousnesses. Even your physical consciousnesses are like this, which is the whole hullabaloo in Western thought about the hard problem, right? Qualia doesn't seem to be, for those who are familiar, qualia doesn't seem to be a physical property. The fact that something is red is not something you find in nature. Red is something that occurs when a conscious being interacts with physical stuff. But red is not a property of the universe. That's a qualia, not a quality. Okay. Um, so what is it that's there observing everything? It's the consciousness stream that's going on. In every moment it has those properties. What makes it seem like it's permanent, i.e. unchanging, is that it always comes into existence in the next moment with the same properties. It's always clear and knowing. And so if you look at it, it looks like it's not changing. But it is. How do you know? Because if it wasn't changing, how could it go from knowing this to knowing this? Right? It is a knowingness or an awareness of the compass, or a knowingness and awareness of the cup. So it is like something to experience the compass, and it's like something to experience the cup. And it's not like something in the same way. So the knowingness or the awareness aspect is changing in that it's able to take new objects. It can reflect or be aware of new objects. It has the same ability to reflect new objects in every moment, but it's a causal continuum. And you know this because it's able to interact with other things. So there isn't something unchanging behind. There is something that has undifferentiating properties behind, you could say, right? This is my view. Can animals become enlightened? If you read the Jataka tales, Adam Lucas, 1260. For those who are just kind of hanging out, I'm going through the comments one by one, so I will get to you if you hang out with me. Um, Also, since we've gone through another 20 minutes, I'll say it again. If everybody chips in $5-10 into the bucket below, or whatever you can, buy me a cup of coffee basically, or a bagel, that kind of thing. Then if half the people that see this chip that in, I'll have plenty of money to carry on doing this for the next month, and I can help you guys with your practice, answer your questions, etc., etc. So means a lot, really does mean a lot, supports me and allows me to support the whole community through teaching. So it's really meaningful if you can chip in a little bit. Can animals be enlightened? So if you read the Jataka tales, the past lives of the Buddha, the past lives of the Buddha states on many occasions that he was reborn as an animal. And in those lifetimes, he made progress along the Buddhist path through refining his character during his animal rebirths. So can an animal become enlightened? I think from a Buddhist standpoint, and this is a really out there subject, please do stay with me. I'm not going to get too weird, I promise you. Aliens. Who's that guy from the History Channel? It's not aliens, but it's aliens. The guy with the hair, From a Buddhist standpoint, a human is any being anywhere who has sufficient intelligence to understand basically ethics and to change their ethical habits and make new ethical decisions, and to decide that they want to adopt completely new ways of acting or abandon previous types of actions that they were engaged in. And so by nature, you have to be a being of that kind to attain deeper realization. You can make some progress as a being who doesn't have that ability. You can make some progress, but to sort of go the final distance, let's say, in terms of training and realization, you have to be born as some type of being who has that ability. And the only beings who have that type of ability are devas, so heavenly beings in the form realm. The formless realm, they're too blissed out, and human beings. And a human being defined as a being that has that capability and exists in a physical body. So an animal, by definition, would be a being who does not have that capability, you see? So this is a point you kind of have to think about a bit. So even if there are beings on other planets, they are humans in the sense that they may have the ability to basically discern between good and bad actions and adopt new good actions and abandon old bad actions, that kind of thing. And they're an animal by definition if they can't do that and they don't know how to do that. Or their ability to do that is very, very, very limited, right? And in Buddhism, actually, this is when they talk about intelligence. That's what they're talking about. When they go, oh, the main suffering of the animal realms is a lack of intelligence. It's stupidity. They're talking about the fact that talk to your dog as many times as you want about reciting Om Mani Padme Hum. See how it goes. My dog's right over here. I've been trying my best. My boy, come here, come here, come over here. So I've been trying my best to get him to meditate, but despite my best efforts, he won't do it. You know. uh, yeah. Um. Okay, everyone. Let's take 3 minutes. Let's just take a couple of minutes here. I'm going to do a couple of things, including grabbing a charger from my phone, and I will be right back. So do stay with me. I'll be back shortly. If you need to take a bathroom break or whatever, go ahead and do that. I shall return. Stay with me, Puka. Or you? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Oh, okay. What I miss? Right. Carrying on. To add a little bit of color to that question, can animals be enlightened? Because of the way it's phrased, it is possible that Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and even beings like devas in the Buddhist canon can also appear as animals. Again, hopefully not getting too strange for some of you, but again, there's this idea that beings of great spiritual power, which includes devas, which are you could consider to be sort of heavenly beings, bodhisattvas, Buddhas, they can appear as various things to benefit other people. And throughout the course of the Buddha's Jataka tales, his past life tales on his way to enlightenment, there's all sorts of conditions where you see examples of this where beings of various kinds are appearing as, like devas are appearing as people, or uh, it's a very common thing. And even when you get to the Middle Indian period, people like Venerable Asanga. He spent 12 years meditating in a cave, and then he encountered a dog. And I've told this story before. I won't tell it again here on live, but it turns out that this dog, through a series of events, was actually Maitreya appearing to him. So this is a relatively common thing. Some animals may, in fact, be accomplished beings appearing to you to help you do something or accomplish something. Usually in a small episode, like it's probably not your pet cat, but maybe through a sort of random encounter, small events to help you accomplish something or realize something or recognize something. My Greek philosophy is a bit weak. I know a bit about Greek philosophy, but not much beyond sort of the 101 bachelor's level, so I won't comment on that. That's why Krishna's Atma is real. Okay. Are deities personal? Is it right to view and consider them as different masks of one and the same Buddha? Okay, that's actually an interesting question that piggybacks on what I just said. According to the tradition, there are limitless Buddhas, actually. Limitless, countless Buddhas. And I think this also goes back to the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon says there are a bunch of previous Buddhas in this particular universe, that there have been a bunch of previous Buddhas. I think it's 21 or something that have come so far. I can't remember. 14, something like this. And what? What do you want? What do you need? Why are you just wandering around like a lost dog? What do you want from me? So, are deities personal? Yes. Short answer. There are, as we were talking about infinities yesterday, there are an infinite number of sentient beings, which is the largest infinity of beings. There's a smaller infinity of beings in nirvana, and there is a yet smaller infinity of pratyeka Buddhas, and a yet smaller infinity of bodhisattvas on their way to enlightenment, and a yet smaller infinity of Buddhas. So there are infinities of beings of different sizes, and yes, they are personal. Like you and I, they all began exactly like you and I, and becoming a Buddha doesn't remove your personality. How to say? Doesn't remove your individuality. A Buddha is a dependent arising in the same way that you're a dependent arising. So there's no way to make your mind stream, your individual mind stream, into just, I don't know, like a mush of a bunch of other Buddha's mind streams or something. But of course, it gets much more, the discussion becomes much more interesting when you start talking about the fact that a Buddha's mind spreads out everywhere. It's omnipresent. They are omniscient beings. And so their experience of who and what they are is quite a bit different than than our experience of who and what we are at this time. Right. Okay. My phone is back up and running. So now I can monitor what's happening at the edge of the stream. Okay. It's simple cause and effect logic knows it. It's not the permanent Brahman who knows this. I'm not sure. Real world. Okay. I think that's all chat inside the chat. That was a very interesting speculation. Do we know in what kind of practice Jesus engaged in the desert that made this knowing accessible? Again, it's just my opinion, right? I don't know for sure, but I'm, as I was saying earlier, I'm applying my Buddhist lens to the stuff that I'm seeing, and what I see is a man who went into the desert with limited food and water, and sat with himself and struggled with his own internal longings and so forth, because he has this whole struggle with the devil at some point, right? And so he's turning his mind inward, I would imagine. And through this is having unique insights into how things are. And furthermore, we would say in the Buddhist canon that, like, for example, if you were reborn, if your immediate previous rebirth was from the Deva realm and you were reborn as a human being, it's very likely that you're going to have clairvoyance without having to train in concentration. Normally, you have to train in concentration to have clairvoyance. But if you're recently coming from a rebirth that itself came about because of training in concentration, like the Deva realms, the heavenly realms, if you recently came from there, you may sort of incidentally still have clairvoyances and the ability to see other realms of existence and this sort of thing, even without having to train to do it. And when are those experiences going to sort of pop up and manifest for you? Probably when you're spending 40 days alone in the desert without much else to do. So again, I'm putting a Buddhist lens on it and going, how would I explain this and think about this if this was like a story from my tradition? Let's say it wasn't from the Christian tradition. How would I take these experiences and explain them? Right? This is how I would do it. Either he was delusional, which doesn't make sense based upon the types of teachings that he gave, or, you know, he was accessing a bit of clairvoyance and saw some things, and that convinced him of what he should do. And certainly, if he had the ability to do various types of minor miraculous things, which may in fact be true, I mean, we have those in the Buddhist tradition too. Uh, that would point to him being a fairly accomplished practitioner, if not in that life, in a previous life of some type of concentrative practice, because that's where those abilities come from. All the way back to the Pali Canon, before somebody says, "Oh, that's some weird Mahayana thing." No, you find that in the Pali Canon. All right. My experience with deities makes them appear personal. Yeah. Again, anybody that sort of, how do I put this without sounding very strange? This is always my struggle with you guys. Because on the one hand, if you knew me 10 years ago, most of what I'm saying now would sound totally bizarre, and I know how it sounds without having put all the time and work and logic and blah 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 into it. But I think some of these things are real because I was skeptical for so long, thought them through, gathered evidence, and experienced things myself that made me go, "Oh yeah, that's probably real." And the same is true with things having to do with deities and all this. I've been around too much, seen too much, experienced too much to think that it's just something people make up in their heads or something. And yes, deities are personal. They're persons. I've seen it claimed that neutral Vedana is possibly the most insidious. Yeah, yeah. So it's the most so the neutral way in which you experience things is the most insidious because it makes you indifferent to most of your life. And indifference is a very quiet thing, a very creeping quiet thing. Because the nature of consciousness is bliss. So the appearance of what's here, whether it's conventionally pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, the nature of those is bliss. The nature of those is incredible enjoyment. Because that's what consciousness is when you get the BS out of the way. It doesn't matter what's appearing to consciousness, consciousness itself is blissful. So, because of this, the fact that you just think a huge amount of what appears to consciousness is boring as hell is, it just flies in the face, really, of the nature of your own being. And with a few years of practice, you can see that that's true. You can at least get some tastes of what consciousness is like, and you'll know you're really missing out most of the time. Okay, you don't need a constant thing to notice the change. A changing thing can notice another changing thing. Yeah, that's right. So to go back to the point about Advaita Vedanta, the unchanging ground of awareness that's sort of observing everything else but itself is not changing. Yeah, you need a constantly changing thing to notice the change, right? Because if it was abiding in a state where it wasn't changing, nothing could appear to it that it would be aware of. It would be like having your eyes closed and trying to see the objects that were appearing. If it's locked into a specific condition of knowing, then it can't know a new thing. So therefore, we can show that consciousness must be a changing thing. Oh gosh, the chat jumping. Okay, doctor, what's the Theravada equivalent of chittas of mind stream? Oh, in the Yogacara. I mean, I think the Yogacara just accept that there's a mind stream. But the Yogacara who follow the sutras, there's two different major branches in my understanding of Yogacara: those who follow reason and those who follow the sutras. Those who follow reason reject the two extra consciousnesses put forward by some sutras teaching Yogacara. Those who follow the sutras accept that there are two additional consciousnesses besides the normal 6 consciousnesses that are described everywhere else in Buddhism. So those are the self-reflexive knowers and the storehouse consciousness. Yeah. So those two extras, in addition to your 5 senses and your mental consciousness, those two extras are put forward in certain sutras. The Yogacara that accept those are the Yogacara who accept blah blah blah, and the ones who don't are the ones who follow reason, according to the Tibetan way of dividing up those schools. So, in my understanding, everybody accepts the mind stream. That's something we all agree on. But when you're talking about where and how is karma stored in particular in the mind, and sort of what is the aspect of mind that is creating the continuity between lives, because a lot of your minds dissolve between lives and they go away, and then you have to have a new, those have to arise as a new type of mind. But there are certain types of minds that are sort of ticking along, we could say, underneath the surface, right? And those would be things like clear light mind, or according to the Yogacara, the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness. That's what they say carries on from lifetime to lifetime. I like the philosophical take. Makes work more better. Good. Why do you accept the claims made by Buddha and not Krishna? Both figures make claims. Are you even aware of the absolute claims Krishna makes in the Bhagavad Gita? I've read parts of the Bhagavad Gita. I think the reason that I have more confidence in the Buddhist description is that the metaphysic, the ontology put forward by Buddhism, explains more than the metaphysic or ontology described by, in my understanding of the Hindu scriptures, broadly conceived. So broadly conceived, we have very much the same problem in terms of a creator being of some kind with the Hindu scriptures that we have with the Christian scriptures. We have an unchanging entity who gives rise to all of the changing entities that we know of, and that is impossible, to put it in briefly. I know I'm bad at being brief. Unchanging things never give rise to changing things, and they can't interact with changing things. And therefore, the whole thesis put forward fails. And if that's the thesis put forward by the being that is the centerpiece of your tradition, then there may be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of incredible, important, viable insights that are put forward by that being. But the most essential, deepest underlying claim that's being made is false, in my view, obviously, right? So if that view is false, then some of the other ancillary claims, some of the other sort of minutiae, let's say, surrounding the central claim might also be false. So since I find the central ontology and metaphysic of Buddhism to be the most reliable, I accept the Buddhist versions of these ancillary claims. In other words, maybe Krishna says, well, actually, your consciousness is just part of me, and I'm unchanging, and there's a limited number of past lives because I was what brought it all into being originally. whatever, right? Or your mind stream begins at some point because it comes out of mine and eventually it comes back into me, these sorts of things. Okay, that's fine. But since your fundamental claim is wrong, I'm going to accept the Buddhist one that doesn't have the problem of it of a unchanging universal creator being. You see? So if you were asking, that's why, roughly. Yeah. Word. Eric Clausen, Liam Thomas Christopher. I'm not familiar, and I will definitely forget those two names by the time we get to the end of this stream. So send that to me by Facebook Messenger, or send it to me somewhere, and I'll look them up. For those of you who are floating through, who happen to be subscribers or just interested or finding this valuable, if everybody that floats through this stream chips in $5, the equivalent of a cup of coffee or a bagel, maybe whatever you can afford, in one of the two links that I have down below, that will provide me with plenty of resources to get a new laptop, first of all, because this one sucks, and then I can stream more consistently for you guys. But also just to cover the bills and so forth, so that I can carry on giving you guys this advice, training you all in meditation, and creating content responding to interesting things about Buddhism I find around the web. So if you're finding this valuable, drop $5, $10 in the link below, or whatever you can afford, so that I can carry on doing this with you guys. Once again, very meaningful to do that. I have it pinned in the chat. Follow the link, drop a few bucks. Let's carry on. Ankura, thank you so much for that answer. Let me see. I can't even remember what I answered, Ankura. Oh, yes. We were talking about the unchanging mind versus the changing mind. Okay. Oh, yeah. That's a great question. Space cowboy. God, what a misnomer your your name is. That is the least space cowboy question I have had, I think, since I started doing these streams. What do you think is the biggest misconceptions and misinterpretations do you find most prevalent when conversing with or responding to Christians/Western minds? What a fantastic question. First and foremost, even among Buddhists, the very biggest, most prolific, most terrible, worst thing in the world that I've seen is the misunderstanding of what Buddhists mean by ignorance. What do we mean when we say you are ignorant? And what do we mean when we say we have a solution for that problem? The answer to those two questions is Buddhism. And because so many people get that wrong, they begin, from a Christian standpoint, debunking things that aren't Buddhism. So you're arguing against a position that I don't hold, which in a way is sort of fantastic. In a way, it's fantastic that my job so far has been to go around and to find Christians making arguments that aren't the position that we hold, and then just saying, actually, that's not what we think, right? Like, that's actually a pretty nice position to be in. Of course, unfortunately, these are trained rhetoricians, they're trained orators, they're trained at convincing people to change their minds by moving their hearts, not necessarily by getting things right, but by making arguments, statements, compelling stories, narratives that move your mind and move your heart. We're not actually entirely logical beings. We're feeling beings. So to win the argument in the most critical sense, in other words, to convince someone to leave Buddhism and become Christian, or to just abandon religion altogether, you don't actually have to understand the position you're arguing against, which is really horrifying, but it's the truth. So, yeah, the biggest thing is, what do we mean by ignorance and what do we mean by wisdom? The other really, 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 really big problem is that in the West, in particular, in the Western world, there is a glut, a plethora, a smorgasbord, a menagerie of meditation bullshit. Everyone is trying to sell you some bullshit. Everyone is trying to tell you can just follow your thoughts and it's all going to work out. Everyone's telling you that you can just listen to pink noise or listen to some person doing ASMR who doesn't know what the hell they're talking about in terms of meditation, or just listen to this music and your kundalini is going to rise. Or like there is just an abundance of nonsense in terms of what the hell is meditation. When we say this term meditation, what do we mean? And if it means something specific, then that means there will be a specific set of conditions and causes and things that make that happen. And if you don't do those things, it doesn't happen. And I got to tell you, if you go to with great respect for the physical benefits you get from yoga, for example, if you go to a yoga center and they're playing music the whole time, you can't enter into yoga on your body because there's music playing. So if it smells like incense and there's music playing and 2/3 of your attention is on the music and the incense and the person next to you and whether or not you showered today and whatever else, and you're trying to put the entirety of your mental attention into the tactile field, you're going to fail. You're going to fail. And if you're watching a YouTube video that's supposed to be a meditation on body scanning, and somebody in the video is playing music in the background, and they're talking like this, because clearly you can't meditate unless we're all talking like this together, because meditation requires that you're really soft. And I mean, what is this? What is it about making your mind absolutely razor sharp and superhumanly capable that makes you think it has anything to do with sitting around whispering and, I don't know, like getting a little stress relief from your day? If you want the stress relief, do the hardcore practice. And it's going to suck for like 6 months. And then you're going to start seeing results that you couldn't ever get from BS mindfulness or BS ASMR. Let's talk about gratitude for the 474th time videos that are all over the internet, or this is the Kundalini music that'll make your Kundalini rise, or whatever. Along with that package of BS, there's also this idea that meditation is the only thing to do, and meditation is the only answer, and all of this just comes down to meditation. Do you know that Dogen makes fun of that idea in the Shobogenzo? The father of just sitting practice, who advised his practitioners to do 8 or 12 hours of sitting a day, made fun of the idea that all of this is just about just sitting practice. And he could quote sutras from memory. How many of these people today, leading their Dharma centers and what have you, can quote sutras from their mind? Come on. So he was an incredible scholar of Buddhism. I mean, a genius of his generation. So these practices for training and meditation require that you know some stuff, okay? If you want to be successful in your meditation practice, you need to know what the hell you're trying to do. You need to know what the conditions are that make it happen. And then furthermore, this is a little bit of a tangent, but there's just a huge amount of literature from Asia and India that is written for people who are in retreat or going to go into retreat and try to attain all of this stuff while living in retreat. And so the advice they're giving you is for a person who's not going to be in the world doing the training in the world. So one of the big what is the big misunderstanding things is that you have literally 1 million people, because I manage Facebook groups that at least at one time they had about 1 million people in them. There's 1 million people arguing in Facebook groups who are saying, not only is it all about meditation, but the type of life you need to be living is like you are a renunciate living in a cave if you want to make progress in all this. And that's a lie. It's an absolute lie. And they don't know it's a lie. If you want the truth, again, some of you are going to leave the stream immediately when I say this, and I'm sorry, but it's the truth. The two greatest lay yogis that I know, who are recognized as extremely accomplished practitioners, both of whom, and again, believe me or don't believe me, I have witnessed with my own eyes doing things that are not physically possible, okay? Watched television and had favorite television shows. One of them plays video games occasionally. They used social media. So the idea that you can, and both of them talk about politics. One of them literally goes to the House of Lords and hangs out with all the politicians at the House of Lords. One of them used to have a position at the UN. One of them worked on Wall Street. You don't have to be cut off from the world or people or other stuff to make progress in this and become a great being, to become a holy being. And the internet is just filled with people giving you terrible advice and making you feel like absolute garbage for trying to have a real life while training in the path. And it's because a lot of the texts are written for people who won't be in the real world while training in the path. And so you need specific advice from people that are accomplished in that way. And you need to know where to look in the texts, and you need to know how to interpret the texts so that you can do these practices while living as a real person in the real world. Even at the time of the Buddha, there were students of his who were lay people and great meditators, great practitioners. They lived in the real world, they did real stuff, but even the monks would come to them for advice on meditation. You know, this is not something new. Okay. I digress. As you can tell, I'm passionate about this because from the bottom of my soul, to my bones, to my marrow, I want people to make progress in this stuff. I want to help people make progress in this stuff. And if you believe all of this nonsense, if you believe that selflessness means that nobody and nothing exists, if you believe that Nagarjuna was saying that you can't have any viewpoint about anything, and that's what was final position was, if you believe that the only thing you need to do is meditate and everything else doesn't matter, if you believe that you can do meditation while listening to somebody speak to you in ASMR and telling you to be grateful about stuff, and this is what meditation is, and on and on and on and on, you won't be able to do this. And if you think that you can't do it because you're living in the real world, that's not true. And all the people that are telling you that, they're lying to you, or they're just ignorant. You do need to go into retreat from time to time, and you may need to go into retreat for a long period of time at some point to get over certain things or accomplish certain things in your practice. But most of your practice can be done in the real world. Okay? So, on that note, I'm building a community of lay people. If you go to the school group, SKOOL, that's in the description below, you'll see that I have a link. And what I'm building with that community is a group of 100 to 200 people who are interested in doing serious study, serious training, and will develop a common basis of practice, but you can also maintain your own current tradition. You don't have to leave your lineage or something. When we have 150 to 200 people, then that community can begin sponsoring people going into intensive retreat. So once you know what meditation is, once I have this community built up and we have 100, 200 people, all of us can just chip in like $10 or $15, and somebody can go into retreat for 2 weeks and not have to worry about the water bill, not have to worry about, you know, how am I going to pay this or that, and what's going to happen to this, because we'll have a support network of people to help us. So this is what I'm trying to build with the school group is one, obviously an ability for me to be able to have a recurring thing so that I can carry on teaching and doing all this. But two is a more serious community of people that are training together and supporting each other doing retreat. So if that sounds cool to you, go to the school link, join the school, and that's where that activity is mainly going on. And like I said before, for those of you who are passing through and new, uh, if this all is really helpful to you, click the link that I have in the chat and just drop $5, $10. If everybody that passes through does that, then there'll be plenty of money for me to upgrade my crappy laptop and to carry on doing this with you guys for a whole nother month. It only takes half of the people that come through because there's going to be 500 of you. If half of you drop $5 in there, it's done. I can carry on doing this and we'll be in great shape. So please do chip in whatever you can. Okay, next, Nick. Can you recommend some Buddhist works that were the most important in your intellectual development so far? Yeah. Yeah, I definitely can. But I won't. And here's why I won't. Um, Give me a second. What I would recommend is find a lineage. Find a lineage. Find a teacher. Like, for example, Jamyang Buddhist Center in London has started doing remote classes that you can attend from anywhere in the world, being led by Geshe Tenzin Namdox, one of my teachers, where he's teaching incredibly detailed, rich stuff about various texts that are really important to the tradition, many of which I've either studied or studied parts of. It's extremely important that when you're studying Buddhist materials and Buddhist texts, you do it in the context of a lineage, because the lineage tells you what would otherwise be word salad to you. The lineage helps you understand what the word salad actually means, and the lineage helps you understand, okay, this concept, even though we're not talking about it right now, it connects to these four other concepts. And even though we're not talking about it right now, here's how you take this concept and you apply it in real life. Even though we're not talking about it right now, here's a really accomplished practitioner in this particular concept we're working on, and here's what happened to them. Isn't that incredible and inspiring? That sort of thing. So the lineage gives you this richness that makes the text mean something, so that you don't just read it and go, okay, cool, done with that. When my teacher and I, when we read, for example, the Kagyu Gelug tradition of Mahamudra, the commentary on the Ganges Mahamudra by the Panchen Lama and the Dalai Lama, when we read that text together, it took us, I think, like 6 years to read the book, because we went through every single line of the book and every single reference in the back of the book, where it'd say like reference number 4, and we would go to the back of the book and we read every single reference, and we would stop and talk about and comment upon and try to digest every single passage from beginning to end. So just reading the book is not the thing. Reading the book with an experienced practitioner who can connect it to your practice, connect it to other things, connect it to inspiring examples that make you want to do it, that's the thing. Yeah. So find a lineage that you like and study texts in that lineage with people that are accomplished in the use of those texts as part of their practice. That's what I would recommend. What do you think of Julius Evola's interpretation of Buddhism? I'm not familiar with Julius Evola. I'm sorry, Pedro Menendez. I don't know her or him. Julius, that could be either one, right? Maybe him. In order to be Buddhist, do you have to maintain ethics? No, actually. Again, maybe a lot of people will drop the stream if I don't explain that, but no. So there's famous examples in the Buddhist corpus where someone took refuge in the Buddha and they didn't want to or couldn't, for some practical reason, according to them, keep the ethical commitments of Buddhism. So they believed that they should, and they believed it was a good idea, but for some reason they weren't able to keep it. And so they're still Buddhist. They're just not maintaining the ethical commitments of Buddhism. So there's one example where there was a butcher, and the only thing he knew how to do, I guess, was butchering animals. So he would kill animals and butcher them and sell them at the market. And of course, we discussed on the previous stream that killing animals is wrong according to Buddhism and leads to bad rebirths. But eating meat by itself is not considered bad, but that's not the point. In any case, he was killing animals every day, right? So when he took his pratimoksha vows, his individual liberation vows, this butcher said, I vow at nighttime to never kill. So during the day, I'm a butcher. This is my livelihood. I don't know how to do anything else, or whatever his reasoning was. So I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. You are the highest authority. I believe you when you say it's wrong to do this, but I have no other choice. I'm stuck based on my circumstances, so I'm going to continue killing during the day. Nonetheless, I vow to never kill at night. And so he did. And then, according to the Buddhist canon, he was reborn in kind of this weird. There are some rebirths that are very weird. They're sort of uh, like they would say being reborn as a dog in someone's in like a rich person in like Oprah's house is a really weird rebirth because you get everything you want, but you're not smart enough to do any practice, you know? Like everyone waits on you, like your desires are fulfilled to an unbelievable degree. It's a very strange rebirth. So he had one of these kind of strange rebirths where he was reborn in the devil realm, and during the and at night all of these devas would come and they would have drink and eat, and it was like this incredible blissful feast every single night. And then during the day the entire realm would turn into a hungry ghost realm, and he would suffer incredible pain and difficulty and suffering. And so he would alternate between basically the experience of a devil realm and the experience of a hungry ghost realm because of the way he had taken his vows. So, do you have to be Buddhist? I mean, do you have to maintain ethics to be a Buddhist? No, you don't. But you will suffer the consequences according to Buddhism. Bruh, have you always been this chill? No, bruh. No, I definitely have not always been this chill. Uh, when I was younger, I was a disaster. ADHD, uh, just on the right side of the ASD spectrum, you know, just there on the edge on the right side where I could still function like a normal person. Uh, and very badly ADHD. You know, if I didn't think something was interesting, I was the kid who'd be in the back of the classroom, like trying to balance my chair on one leg until I fell over, you know, and then somehow got straight A's anyway, which pissed everyone off. Anyways, no, I definitely have not always been this chill. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. Platonism new is something like divine intellect. Noetic would be something like the experience of grasping by intellect rather than the senses. Okay. Good morning, General Tao, or do you prefer General Dao? You tell me. I know it's been quite a while since you left that comment. I'm not sure either. So the person who made the comment about noetic would need to clarify what they meant. If someone went back in time and told the Buddha about atomic structure, how would the Buddha respond? Would he be surprised? Okay, so Suya, Suyash, Suyash Mishra, Suya. I thought your name was Japanese potentially, but you're missing a syllable there. So now I don't know how to pronounce it. Are you from India? Suya Shmisra.